Hello and welcome back. So we had been discussing about the concept of embodied cognition that was started by Maurice Merleau-Ponty and how he has been giving a befitting reply to the Cartesian split or the disembodied cognition. Now, with our embodied cognition, we had in our previous lecture discussed that how this approach highlights how our physical experiences influence our thoughts, emotions, and understanding. In this context, we had also tried to talk about the spinal cord epidural stimulation or the EES, where we have tried to assess how it is a medical intervention that involves the implantation of a device that delivers electrical stimulation to the spinal cord. We had also tried to see how the spinal cord epidural stimulation technique has been researched and applied to help restore movement in individuals with spinal cord injuries. By targeting specific areas of the spinal cord, the stimulation can enhance the communication between the brain and the body, potentially allowing individuals to regain some motor function and improve their quality of life. Going ahead, we had picked up on the concept of paralysis, and we had shown how paralysis is just not a disembodied cognition, but definitely an embodied cognition. Paralysis, as we had discussed, is a loss of muscle function in one or more parts of the body, which can result from various causes, including spinal cord injuries, strokes, or neural diseases. The degree and nature of paralysis can vary widely depending on the location and the severity of the injury or condition. We had also tried to reconnect the dots between the concept of paralysis with embodied cognition. And in this context, we had tried to show how, by restoring some level of movement through EES, researchers and clinicians have aimed to enhance patients' cognitive and emotional well-being, demonstrating the interconnectedness of body, mind, and environment in recovery and rehabilitation. Going forward, we had tried to pick up the modern philosophers of mind who have been a strong votary of embodied cognition. We had about seen Sean Gallagher's work, where we had mentioned Gallagher, a philosopher and cognitive scientist, a leading proponent of embodied and inactive approaches to cognition. His work on the embodied mind emphasizes that the body shapes cognitive processes and challenges traditional views that isolate the mind from the physical world. In a way, Gallagher's work is a classic response to Cartesian disembodied cogito. And with Gallagher, we see there are a series of philosophers who have also continued in this discussion. Gallagher's work, How the Body Shapes the Mind, explores how bodily experiences fundamentally influence perception, memory, and action. Again, this work is one of the primary telltale of embodied cognition, for unlike in René Descartes' body being secondary and mind being popular, here in this book, Sean Gallagher clearly elaborates how the body shapes the mind. That is, the so-called second-class citizen, the body, as per René Descartes, is the influential entity and who interconnects with the mind and come up with the concept of embodied cognition. We had also been talking about Alva Noe. Noe, as we had seen, argues that perception is an inactive process, emphasizing that cognition arises through active engagement with the environment. In Out of Our Heads, he claims that consciousness is not just in the brain, but emerges through interactions with the body and world. Noe builds on Merleau-Ponty's view by showing that perception is a kind of skillful activity involving the whole body rather than passive mental representation. So we find that Alva Noe's work in Out of Our Heads, he focuses about consciousness, which is not just brain programming, but that the interconnectedness, the interactions that the body has vis-a-vis the world as much as the world has vis-a-vis the body, the brain, culminates to what he calls as perception. So for Alva Noe, clearly, perception is a kind of skillful activity involving the whole body rather than passive mental representation, which further means that if there is an attack of paralysis, say in my left leg, it isn't the case that only my left leg is influenced or is affected. In a way, my entire constitution, mental, bodily, physical, environmentally, is affected too. So to look upon body or the entire embodied constitution only as parts is definitely problematic, and Alva Noe precisely picks up on this equation. Third, we have Evan Thompson. Thompson, a philosopher known for his work on embodied cognition, particularly within the enactivist tradition, integrates Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology with contemporary cognitive science and Buddhist philosophy. His book, Mind in Life, argues that life and mind are continuous, supporting the idea that cognition is inherently embodied and relational, grounded in our bodily interactions with the world. So in the case with Evan Thompson too, we see the continuity as we had seen with Sean Gallagher, Noe's works, that our embodied cognition is a continuous process. And this idea of that life and mind are continuous, the cues are taken from Buddhist philosophy. For we understand the epicenters of Buddhism is to do with momentariness. It is to do with the Pratitya Samutpada theory or the doctrine of dependent origination theory. So the dependent origination is there. We cannot really say that the mind is independent of the environment or the environment is independent of the body or the body is independent of the mind. Not at all. As long as there is life, there will be the dependent origination theory with the mind, the life, and it is a continuous and ongoing process where we cannot really say that, well, this is the full stop, this is the starting point. Not at all. And this is precisely where even Thompson, because what influence from the Oriental traditions, Buddhism here, definitely deserves a standing ovation for giving out a clear-cut perspective on embodied cognition. Further, we also have Andy Clark, who is known for his theory of the extended mind. Clark argues that cognitive processes extend beyond the brain and are distributed across body and environment. His view, explored in Supersizing the Mind, suggests that tools, technologies, and physical environments are integral to cognition, aligning with Merleau-Ponty's idea that the body and world jointly shape experience and thought. So if we are to paraphrase Andy Clark's work, who is very popularly known for his extended mind theory, we would see a happy change here. And the happy change is the supersizing the mind. Supersizing means mind thus is no longer restricted to what is inside the mind, but more about what is outside the mind through the tools, the technologies, or the physical environments. For example, someone who has lost his leg is dependent on an artificial leg. Now, that artificial leg, as much as it is a part of the environment, it is very much a part of his entire embodied cognition. And that artificial leg is no longer an entity for him, but that artificial leg continues to be an extended mind. So Clarke's perspective is refreshing, for he comes up with a very unique approach to the idea of mind by addressing the extended mind theory. Going ahead, we also have Francesco Varela, along with Evan Thompson and Eleanor Roche, co-authored The Embodied Mind, which brought phenomenology into dialogue with cognitive science. Varela's inactivist approach emphasizes that cognition arises through dynamic interactions between the body and the world, resonating with Merleau-Ponty's insights on the body's central role in shaping perception. Now, when we discuss Francesco Varela, we will be happily surprised that Evan Thompson too, who had been largely influenced with the Buddhist phenomenological module vis-a-vis the embodied cognition, comes up with the work together with Eleanor Roche, which was entitled as The Embodied Mind. And the perspective or the position they have taken in this book is how phenomenology can enter into a dialogue with cognitive science. Now, this bridge, so phenomenology is taken as the bridge between the world and the inside and the outside, and this is why this work is so popularly been significant, for its approach emphasizes that cognition arises through dynamic interactions between the body and the world, and it isn't through a mechanistic or a calculative or a monotonous way of interaction. Dynamic because it can spring from anywhere, anytime, however, and we just do not know how the interactions would happen. That precisely is the key theme of embodied cognition, which Francesco Varela too focuses on. We also have Mark Johnson. Johnson's work with George Lakoff on embodied cognition in Philosophy in the Flesh explores how bodily experiences shape language, concepts, and abstract thought. He argues that metaphors we use to understand abstract ideas are grounded in sensory and motor experiences, supporting the idea that cognition is intrinsically embodied. Now, this task or this assignment of Mark Johnson with George Lakoff is precisely significant for these very reasons, that their work on embodied cognition shows how our various experiences, body experiences, shape not only just our thought processes, but the way we speak, our language, our comprehension of concepts or comprehension of abstract thought processes. So bodily experiences are rather the deciding factors that decide or that tells us how we are going to respond to comprehending some thought processes, which may be concrete, which may be abstract, depending on our sense stimuli. He has also argued that the metaphors or such quotes where we understand abstract ideas are grounded in sensory and motor experiences. Otherwise, I think for a lot of us who have read Plato's Republics or the allegory or the metaphors, allegory of the cave, we would have never really gauged the idea of the utopian world that Plato sketches if the embodied cognition was not a part of our entire existence. Further, we also have Thomas Metzinger. Thomas Metzinger, known for his work on selfhood and consciousness, Metzinger's being, no one explores how the sense of self is constructed through embodied processes. While he diverges from Merleau-Ponty in some respects, he still considers the body essential in creating the phenomenal self-model aligning with the broader embodied cognitive perspective. Now, we have taken up Metzinger to focus and show that as much as there are the supporters of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, there are also philosophers who may have a slightly different view, a divergence to the original embodied cognition of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, but nevertheless there are some conversions too. In Metzinger's work, Being No One, Metzinger explores how the sense of the self is constructed through embodied processes. That is, I have a grasp of myself, I have an understanding of the self because there is an underlying embodied processes happening. If this process was negated, if this process was taken out of my system, I will not even have a sense of the self. So Metzinger is very clear that because for embodied processes, we have a sense of self, and thus very rightly he has entitled his work as Being No One, because if we do not really address the concerns of embodied processes, we will in no way understand the sense of self. So we do see and understand that these thinkers, along with others in philosophy and cognitive science, have contributed to the development of embodied cognition as a mainstream paradigm. They build on Merleau-Ponty's foundational ideas, offering nuanced perspectives that incorporate insights from neuroscience, phenomenology, and psychology, ultimately challenging the notion that cognition is confined to the brain alone. The present relevance of the spinal cord epidural stimulation, which we had been discussing for a while now, EES, in philosophy of mind, highlights significant discussions surrounding the nature of consciousness, identity, and embodied cognition. EES, particularly in its potential to restore movement and sensory feedback to individuals with paralysis, provides a contemporary grounding for classical philosophical inquiries regarding the mind-body relationship. Here are some insights and classical examples that illustrate this relevance. 1. Mind-body interaction. EES exemplifies the ongoing dialogue regarding how physical states such as neural activities in the spinal cord can influence mental states such as perception and cognition. Philosophers like Descartes, with his dualism, posed challenges regarding how these two realms interact, which is still pertinent today. EES can be seen as an instance where physical stimulation of the body leads to changes in mental states and capabilities, thus supporting a more integrated view of mind and world. Embodiment and consciousness. The work of Merleau-Ponty, as mentioned previously, emphasizes that consciousness is fundamentally embodied. EES demonstrates this idea by highlighting how restoring motor function can enhance individuals' conscious experiences and agency. People may experience a renewed sense of self and identity when they regain control of their bodies, suggesting that consciousness is not merely a product of cognitive processes but deeply intertwined with physical presence and action. Phenomenology of experiences. From a phenomenological perspective, EES allows researchers and philosophers to explore the lived experiences of individuals recovering movement. This aligns with ideas from thinkers like Heidegger and Sartre, who focused on existence and being in the world. By understanding how EES impacts phenomenal experiences, philosophers gain insights into how physical capabilities shape one's existential conditions and sense of being. Now, the classical examples of EES would be the Descartes' dualism. René Descartes, as we have been quoting him, famously distinguished between the mind, res cogitans, and body, res extensa. The implications of EES challenge strict dualist views by providing evidence that manipulating physical states can have profound effects on mental capabilities. It fosters discussions on how neural mechanisms in the body influence mental processes, bridging the gap between Cartesian dualism and a more integrated view. Locke's identity theory. So we are now discussing, after we had discussed the contemporary philosophers, the classical philosophers who have implicitly mentioned about EES. Implicitly because there is no as such explicit reference of EES, but when we paraphrase and when we revisit their theories, we can definitely connect the dots with EES. So to begin with, we had started with René Descartes, and now we are coming to the second philosopher, and that is Locke. John Locke, as we all understand by now, is the father of empiricism, and he was called as the father of empiricism because for him all that makes sense ought to be through the litmus test of sense perception. He, in a way, was anti-rationalist or anti-Cartesian. For the rational philosophers' slogan was, all that makes sense is through reasoning, but the empiricist theorists would address that whatever makes sense is through our sense perception. Thus, on the one hand, we have rationalist school of thought, on the other, we have the empiricist school of thought. So, as much as we do discuss the rationalist school of thought as the trace or the connection of Descartes' philosophy, we also have to connect with Locke's identity theory. So, John Locke's identity theory of personal identity emphasized a continuity of consciousness as essential for identity. EES highlights how regaining control of limbs can alter a person's self-perception, raising questions about how physical capacity influences one's identity. The experiences of individuals using EES challenge the notion that identity is solely tied to memories or consciousness alone. We also have David Hume. Now, David Hume was picked up as one of the classical thinkers because with our rationalist thinker René Descartes, with our empiricist thinker John Locke, we also have the idealist thinker David Hume, who is David Hume suggested that self is a collection of perceptions and experiences rather than a singular entity. EES can be analyzed through this lens by observing how regaining physical abilities impacts the bundle of experiences. This introduction of movement and autonomy reshapes how individuals perceive themselves and relate to their experiences, reinforcing Hume's perspective on the fluidity of personal identity. So, from the stance of the classical thinkers to the contemporary thinkers, we do see that EES has had an impact in our philosophy of mind. The relevance of spinal cord epidural stimulation in philosophy of mind thus lies in its capacity to illuminate foundational questions about the relationship between the mind and body. And as long as the questions are being asked, as long as the critical evaluation is open, as long as the chasm is broken, the philosophy of mind continues to thrive. There will be points of convergence, there will be points of divergence, and such convergence and divergence are needed for the henceforth philosophers of mind to continue with their research, to continue with the thought process. For in philosophy, we do not necessarily have a laboratory, though there are some philosophers of mind who of late have tried to build up the physicalist stand of mind through laboratories, scientific experiments, and so on and so forth. But by and large, because we are mostly connected with the art of questioning, as long as we are questioning, as long as we are discussing, philosophy thrives. For in philosophy, clearly our discussions are our laboratories. So at the end, we can say that by providing real world implications of philosophical theories through discussions or through practical lab experiments or through convergence or points of divergence, EES fosters a richer understanding of human experience, ultimately bridging the gaps between abstract philosophical thought and lived realities. This interplay invites continuous exploration and discussion in both philosophical and neuroscientific domains. So, whenever we are talking about the lived experiences or lived realities, we need to understand that we are not talking about the corpse realities. For when we connect the Cartesian split, somewhere the disembodied cognition connotes a corpse reality. We, on the other hand, with the bringing in of embodied cognition, we talk about lived reality. So, wherever there is lived reality, there is life, and wherever there is corpse reality, there is death. And with philosophy or the concept of EES, we understand that the phenomenological perspective, or be it the analytical perspective, or whichever the methodologies that one might be interested in, it definitely gives a boost to researchers, to philosophers, to explore the experiences, lived and otherwise, of individuals recovering in movement. And this is what popularly our embodied cognition is all about. Thank you so much. So this was a lecture on embodied cognition, part 1 and part 2. Thank you.